I
We
didn't know
are
if I was going to have to go reverse.
Yes, we are live. So this is Pants Aren't Required to Write. Welcome everyone to the stream. We have a fabulous host of panelists here to discuss the topic today. I'm Jack Brophy, author of Scarlet Citadel, and with me we have four of the most estimable authors one could hope to meet. I suppose we'll go from one to the other. If y'all would be comfortable talking about who you are, or actually, Kev might just leave. Kev might just leave in the middle of introductions. He's an elusive, furtive pygmy of a man. And Harmon doesn't need pants, folks. So yes, I suppose we can start with Harmon. Harmon, tell us who you are, what you've been working on, and yeah.
Hey, everybody. I'm Harmon Cooper. I'm working on finishing a couple of series this year. So I'm publishing the 8th Pilgrim book at the end of the month, and that finishes that series. And I have another Cowboy Necromancer that I'll be finishing before I start launching some new things. And you can find me at harmoncooper.com. Sounds perfect.
Glorious. Will we go to Eric now?
Hi, Eric Hugland. I write the Good Guys and Bad Guys and some other books, and I'm currently trying to finish up a book for Athon.
Fabulous.
Same.
Justin, you?
Sorry. Yes. Oh, sorry. I'm JJ Ackernecht, or Justin. I write Homicidal Aliens Are Invading, and all I got is the stat menu, of which is probably too long of a title, but it gets the point across. Book 2 just came out last month on audio, and I'm working on book 3. If you want to find me online, I'm at jjackernecht.com. That's it.
Fabulous. And last but certainly not least, we have Kev.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Sinclair. I'm author of God of the Feast, Rise of Oshbob, and a few other things. I'm currently working on the penultimate book of God of the Feast, and that series will finish early next year.
Fabulous. Okay, excellent. So, and we'll give you a chance at the end to repeat all that for anyone who comes in later. So, okay, kicking us off then, we're going to talk a little bit about planning. So, William Golding, who wrote The Lord of the Flies, said, "I plan a novel from the beginning right to the end. Before I write anything in detail, I see it in the air as a kind of shape. And then the detail begins to fill in, and I work it out until almost the last flick of an eyelid, and then I write through." Harmon, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off with the proponents of planning your story and structuring.
So I've done both, planned and also just kind of let it happen. And what I think works best for me, without having some eloquent quote, is I do this every day, all the time. So it's to the point now where I'll try to force myself to plot something, and then I'll realize later that I didn't really need to do that. I could have just continued to work on the book. And so I'll struggle with this situation where I'm like, oh, you have to be a better author. You have to plot. And then I'll do that. And then I will just do what I want within those guidelines. And so usually what I've gotten it down to now is I do get the kind of flashes of ideas or whatever. I know that I kind of think of things in scenes. And so I think of them in orders of events, and then I'll just plot ahead a few days ahead of where I'm writing right now. So I know the beginning, I know the end, and then I'm like, okay, like I'm writing an academy book right now. I'm like, I know they need to do this challenge in 2 days, so I'll write that down. And then after that, they need to do this, and after that, they need to do this, and then I let everything else fill itself in. So that's why I have Hybrid Gardener, because I took George R.R. Martin's version of a gardener, which is basically the same thing as a pantser, but it's a little bit hybrid. So I do plan out what I'm doing, but then I let the details fill themselves in.
Okay, fabulous. You lay the track and then the train comes rolling. That's awesome. Yeah. Let's go for Justin.
When it comes to planning, I call it my road trip method. I know where I'm starting, and I know where I want to go, and I might know a couple of little side roads I want to take. But other than that, I just kind of go where the road takes me. And if I see some tourist trap on the side, and it's like, hey, that looks interesting, let's go there. And maybe it's a huge waste of time and it sucks, and I'll take it out in editing or whatever. But that's generally the overall process. If I probably do the most structured planning with backstory. So if I'm doing a lot of lore building or whatever, then I'll do all of that stuff that happens before page 1, and I'll plan that out as meticulously as I can. But then from that point on, it's a little bit more like the road trip, where it's all right, I've put everything in place, let's see where it goes. but I've got like the main tent pole or the main stops on the route planned out.
Yes, absolutely. Eric, can you lend insight into this too?
I mean, it's something similar for me. I tend to think in terms of sequences, not necessarily scenes or chapters. So there could be multiple scenes or chapters that build up a single sequence. I have a beginning, sometimes a middle and an end. I have, those certain points that I feel are important and fit the tropes within whatever story it is. And then I'll also have kind of an idea of the overall series, and just because most of what I work on these days is series based, and where that fits. So I kind of have, the goal of, here's the arc of the whole series, and then here is where the book is, and then here is where each sort of sequence will be. So you're trying to keep in line all of the arcs that are happening, and each scene or sequence needs to be kind of pushing those forward in the same way, but the details of what's happening within there are pretty free. And if I'm sort of flowing and something comes up, then I don't really hold myself accountable to the plan necessarily.
Yeah, I get you. And even though you've planned it out for yourself in the tunnel, the walls of the tunnel, you can they're a little bit porous. You can kind of put
pliant.
That's a pliant, great word. Kev, let's get your thoughts.
I'm here to learn how to plan. I was hoping one of these might. I'm here to learn how to plan.
I got you.
I'll sell you a course.
Oh, great! Yeah, how much?
Yeah,
I'll do it for free because that means I don't have to be working right now.
I'll undercut Eric and do it for freer.
But Kev, sorry, you were going to go on there.
So. I don't know. I don't plan other than that sort of vague idea. I've got an idea of what kind of world I want to write in, be it fantasy, sci-fi, or whatever. And I'll know the tropes that are sort of involved in that area. But it's a funny one because in my head, I kind of feel like my first draft is a plan in itself. So for me, I don't think that it's a very free plan, but then I always wonder people who do plan, are they just doing the same thing anyway with a plan, just in a more rigid format with potentially less character interaction?
Oh, Harmon loves Richie.
Yeah.
I feel like some 1980s music is perhaps required.
I felt like it should have had an arrow through it.
Yeah, we need a boombox. Yeah, Dustin, can you get on that? Does South Wales have a boombox? No, that was interesting to hear you talk about that, Kev. Okay. So now that we have your sense of planning, I suppose the exact opposite. Let's talk about as was so articulately brought up before, the idea of George Martin's gardening versus the architecture of planning. If you'll indulge me, I have a little. You'll know Ray Bradbury. He completely pushes aside everything William Golding said and brings forth the idea of. He says, "I have followed the advice of my good friend Federico Fellini, who, when asked about his work, said, 'Don't tell me what I'm doing. I don't want to know. The grand thing is to plunge ahead then and see what your passions can reveal.'" Let's start with Eric this time. Eric, how do you approach pantsing then?
Well, usually I mean, I'm not a full pantser in that regard. So I'll have kind of a basis, I'll have a character and then have a situation. And then you just start writing and seeing the choices, making the choices and seeing what comes out of it. And so it's literally just sitting there and listening to, usually I try to find music that I think will guide where the scene is going, so I can have sort of an emotional barometer that'll pull me along.
Wow.
And then I just go and see what's there. And if I run into a spot where I feel like I don't know what's going on, there's tactics and techniques for dealing with that. And then, I just try to keep going until I've hit a word count for the day.
Eric, I hope you don't mind if I focus in on one thing you said there. I just found it fascinating, the idea of planning your music to flow along with. Could you give us an example of a particular track or album that you use in that regard?
Sure. So when I'm working on, like, when I know that I'm going to be writing like battle scenes, then I could be looking for stuff like that's more like heavy, like that has a very like percussive instrumentation that can really sort of push the beats. Or if you're doing like, like Last Stands, like listening for, music where it has like big crescendos. And the soundtrack to How to Tame Your Dragon has a lot of sort of fantastic swells and
Yes.
that sort of stuff. And so if you're, there's sort of like if you're doing the that big moment, you can listen to, what is it, Test Flight, I think is a really great one where the music just builds and builds and builds and like has that drop to it and then like catches you back. And so you can find those sorts of songs, and obviously it depends. Each individual person is going to find the music that works best for them. But sometimes, when I'm walking the dog, I'll be sort of like test listening to songs and listening like, just what is the scene that this makes me think of? Like, how could this be used, not necessarily in this book, but in any book? Like what brings to mind when I'm not thinking about something else?
Such a clever technique to marry the two forms of media together, because I suppose music speaks to that deep emotion right in the guts. It's sort of the grand uniter. That's so clever, Eric. Kev, could you lend some of your thoughts into pantsing?
What are we all guilty of?
Yeah, just sort of
Pantsing.
really,
No comment.
really, yeah.
Public indecency.
So, as I touched upon earlier, my first draft is very rough. I do look to word count in the first draft, but I don't over focus on it. And I never go back. I never sort of change anything in my first draft. And I'm just really looking for, it could be 100,000 word book, and my first draft might be about 50,000. So it's kind of just like that. It's getting the ideas down. It's a lot, pretty much 90% of my first draft is conversation as well. It's like all dialogue. And lots of the scenes will be, then there was a big dragon, and then it'll be the conversation around talking about the dragon and how they're going to deal with it, and then going and fighting it. But really, I absolutely love doing my first draft because it's so much fun, and it's like I'll sit there like grinning to myself all the way through as I'm writing it, and just it's a boring bit where they're transitioning from one scene, like one bit to the next of the story. Sack that off till later. And I'm just really pushing towards the end and the climax and keeping the flow going, and then trying to fix all that in the second draft.
Yeah, so the first draft is very much an exploration for you.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Justin?
I definitely lean more towards pantsing than plotting or planning. When I'm planning, it feels a lot more mechanical and plot focused. Like I'm just hitting like, okay, this needs to happen, then this, then this, then this. Whereas if I'm pantsing, I'm with the characters as everything happens. So I generally prefer character-centric approaches to stuff. They're the people I'm hanging out with. But yeah, like I said, I'll get the broad strokes, and then I'll kind of, to use the road trip metaphor, like I'll jump in the car with everyone. And just, I use a lot of dialogue, like Kev said, like it's pretty dialogue heavy at first. And I'll just kind of get the broad strokes. And if something occurs to me, some inspiration strikes, then I'll add it in. And then I have a side document where I'm like, okay, this contradicts the thing I did in a previous chapter. So I'll need to go through and fix that. But the first draft is just forward momentum. So it's like, okay, I'm pantsing, we're in between major stops on the road trip. So let's just go wherever. And if we wind up in a ditch, then so be it. Whatever. We'll fix it later.
Yeah. And then I'm just noticing we're getting is anyone else hearing that slight amount of feedback? I think I'm going to go on mute when I'm not speaking, if y'all wouldn't mind.
I will too. Yeah.
Certainly. Harman, let's get your thoughts on pantsing.
So I have thoughts on everything everyone has said, and so I'll make them brief. First of all, what Kevin said in the first for the first question is something that struck me about basically that plotters are just doing what we do in like a concentrated form, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be any better. It's just like they have the focus style to be able to do that. I'm working with someone now who's I have a co-write that's coming next year with Luke Chimilenko, and he is works more in that way. And I'm excited to play with it because not to break it or anything, but because like I can work in that direction as well. And then it relates a lot back to music. So I was a musician for a long time, and there are two types of musicians that I've noticed a lot. And by a long time, I mean I recorded like 200 songs, but that no one has ever heard. Like I was in studios a lot. My dad was a musician, and they're the people that can like play by ear and just you could play anything from Kendrick Lamar to like a country song, and they could just play along with it. That's more my style. And then there's other people who sometimes are a lot more successful who can't do that. They can only do like the thing that they wrote, and so there. One time in a studio, the singer and guitar player from this band came in, and we asked him like, hey man, you want to like jump on this track? And even though this band, like they're selling hundreds and hundreds of records, they're doing really well. They toured with Metallica. He couldn't just like he needs the actual structure. And so I think it's a neurological thing. Regarding music, I'm very big into making soundtracks, but I've changed that this year and I like it. I was really into making soundtracks per work project because I work on two projects at once. So for Cowboy Necromancer, for example, I made a whole soundtrack of classic like spaghetti Western that on YouTube, I'd play that for like something like War Priest or Pilgrim. I would do like certain types of like West or Eastern, like, that instrument that's kind of like a sitar, the Japanese one, I forget the name of it, like those types of really dynamic like soundtracks. What I read a Reddit post from John Pierce, author of Mage Errant, and he talked about like people who have maybe neurodivergencies benefiting from brainwave.fm. And I went and I checked it out, and I've only been using that now because it basically uses like there's like 1,000 tracks on there that you can just have on repeat, and it uses like neural science to kind of like make you focus better. And so there's everything from lo-fi to like cinematic stuff. And I tested it out for like 3 weeks, and I finally got a subscription because it's like $50 a year. And before I was paying like $10 a month for YouTube just so I wouldn't get ads, because there's nothing shittier than writing something and then a freaking ad pops up. You're like, okay, oh my God, like really pulls you out, right? So I found that really helps with the music, and I found John's recommendation of brainwave.fm, especially for someone like me who's a little bit scatterbrained. It helps me focus a lot better. But music is such an important part of it. And then finally, I was thinking about what Justin said, the exploratory aspect of using like roadmaps. I haven't heard it used that way, and it totally makes sense to me. And I feel like we're all doing some version of the exact same thing, but using different terminology in our head to like justify it. Like Eric saying that he's thinking of certain scenes in a different way. I'm thinking of events in the same way. Justin using this roadmap, and Kevin just like putting it all out and then going back to fix it up. So Pantsers unite.
Sorry, you're completely right. It's almost as if a kind of a pattern developed, or that kind of hybrid model that was discussed earlier. A little bit of column A, a little bit of column. Holy shit! I need to get this book done. So there's a few questions that have come in. By the way, thank you all for your answers. Those are extremely both educational and eloquently put. The first question comes in from Kyle. Does some of your pantsing come from watching movies or shows that inspire you? I suppose we could go first again.
Did you say me there? Yeah, me.
Yeah. Oh yes, Kev. You.
So never specifically. So like, I don't watch something and go like, I'm gonna copy that or anything like that. But to say that every book I've ever read and every film I've ever watched and series, that it doesn't have an influence. It has a massive influence, sort of, just in everything from the flow of how you write. So, so absolutely, yeah. I would say very much so. Definitely, all of it leaves an imprint.
I wonder, is it useful to give perhaps an example of one?
Only in general style. So I like very witty films and I like fast-paced films. So like, I love say Snatch. It's one of my favorite films.
Great.
And it's clever. It's fast-paced. There's just some great dialogue in there. and like a few little plot lines as well that like come together in just a brilliant way. So like that's sort of a really inspiring film in my eyes. And I love like other films along that line. So let's say Lock, Stock, and I like Fight Club as well. Yeah, and I generally like action movies as well. Like
There's a trend of Brad Pitt in there, Kev. Are you trying to tell us something subliminally?
I was very surprised at how well he did playing an Irish gypsy.
Oh, well, we're going to talk about that one later. You stay back after class. Justin, can we get your thoughts on that one? On the inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty similar to Kevin, and I imagine most people who are creative professionally or semi-professionally, in that if I see something and it really resonates with me, I don't just want to take word for word, shot for shot, scene for scene, whatever, something from that. But if it leaves an impact, then it's going in, the vault to some extent or another, and then mixing it with everything else that's already in there, whether that's a current project or whether that's another project that I'm thinking about, then it's going to go through some transmutation and turn into its own thing. So, if I see the famous example, so the Darth Vader, like, Luke, I'm your father. I know that's not verbatim, but you get the point. I don't want to take that scene from Empire Strikes Back and put it in my book. But I might really like that idea of familial conflict crossing over with macro conflict of the war. So I'll be like, okay, I like that a lot. I'm going to do something with that, but it might not be father and son. It might be like whatever, some other family aspect, or even just that micro personal connection expanded into a macro conflict. And then it'll just get churned around until it becomes its own distinct thing. So I'm not just like, haha, gotcha, Lucas, this is mine now, or whatever. So yeah.
It makes sense that both in the process of planning and pantsing, like those influences are going to be sort of filtered through your own heart and your own mind. Like that makes total sense to me. Harmon, can we get your thoughts?
So I tell my wife this too. I consider myself kind of like a media vampire. I have to constantly, because of my output, I have to constantly be consuming different types of media, and so my general schedule is I watch like movies or TV with my wife from like 8 to 10 p.m. at night, and that's she does whatever she does during the day. And I do that with her, and I kind of need to watch things that like I can pull ideas and inspiration from. I do the same when I select video games I'm playing, and I do the same when I select books that I'm reading. So I usually read a book and I listen to a book. And an example happened recently is my wife recommended me to this kind of magical realism Japanese book, and the thing with Japanese writers is the books are really short. So an audio, it's only like 4 or 5 hours. I'm like, yes, it's pretty. I can get some ideas from it, and it starts off like Studio Ghibli and gets real like traumatic, like sexual violence type scenes very quickly, and I'm like, I can't listen to this, not only because of the subject matter, but because like there's like nothing I can really like pull from it, which sounds bad, but the way I look at media and stuff is literally as a media vampire. So it's the weirdest things can bring an inspiration. It could be like I catch my wife watching the end of a Project Runway or something, and then see like a tension between two people and be like, okay, I could use something from that. So I base what I consume based on those things. And I don't mind that. It just means that like sometimes more like artistic things and movies and stuff like that, I generally avoid because genre readers don't care about that stuff. And I've tried to make them care with certain things in the past, like Death's Mantle. Like let's do a story about a guy who his brother is struggling with an opioid addiction, and he's taking Death's Mantle, and he can maybe fix him in some way, but it becomes too emotional and too tense, similar to the book that my wife recommended to me. So I look at it again as a media vampire situation. I constantly have to fill that void to get ideas.
It's interesting, Harmon. Was that out of interest? Was that novel that you read by Haruki Murakami?
No, but I've read 2 of his things. No, I think it's called Hatchling. It's by a female writer. She writes like, but I really like the magical realism stuff because I've written in that with Sacred Cat Island. I kind of touched into that a lot, and I like that. It's not nothing I can really like get inspired by it, and it's also like really weird to listen to. And it's like, I don't, I know that those things exist. It's nothing about that. It's just more about like, if I only have a certain amount of time to listen to something, which to pull ideas from, to see what the genre is doing, I kind of want to use that for, the next Dungeon Crawler Carl or Deathloop and Vampire, something like that, like something that I'm going to like not only enjoy but also see what other people are doing that I could improve my own skill with.
Yes. We saw some love for that phrase, media vampire, in the comments there. Eric, can you close us out with the idea of inspiration and give an example of something that's impacted you?
I think I'm somewhat similar to what Harmon was saying, except that I'm not quite as direct in terms of looking for ideas in that regard. I'm kind of all over the place in what I consume, just with the idea that whatever I take in will come out in some capacity. So I kind of go the opposite direction and try to just reach out for completely weird and different things that I might not necessarily think would have anything to do with what I'm doing. And I also look for certain, I guess, technical things. So I watch a lot of shows that I probably wouldn't, just because they do one or two things really, really well. So like Gilmore Girls, I don't really dig the storylines that much, but the dialogue in it is probably one of the best fast-paced dialogue you'll find anywhere. So I'll watch a lot of that just to try to catch from that. When I'm looking for sort of inspiration, I'm almost always looking for movies about writers who are writing. I don't know, for some reason that helps me like get back to the page. And usually like my go-to and everything else is sort of falling apart is like Shakespeare in Love or oh man, yeah, I'll go with that one for the moment.
Stranger Than Fiction, maybe.
Sometimes that one's a really good one as well, but there's kind of an intensity there I don't want to deal with.
Yes, and I suppose it depends on the fate of the writer as well. Let's say you're dealing with The Shining, you end up in the Kubrick version, frozen in the woods. And the
I do watch Misery a lot more than I probably should admit to.
And the state of your feet, have you been hobbled?
No, but I do have a hard concrete floor that is not heated, so I'm probably going to lose them to frostbite this winter.
Look after yourself, Eric. Super quick to jump on one question from CLG. New question. WTF is pantsing in this context? I think we can just knock this out of the park. Pantsing is just sort of gardening, as was brought up earlier. You're moving through the story. You're not necessarily structuring it. You're going through it like an arrow. You're exploring. You're laying the roadwork. So let's go to a question by Sharon Schultz. Can you expand on how writers have different styles, speeds, and writing processes? I think, yeah, absolutely. Will we start with Harmon this time?
I don't know. I don't know what there is to expand on with that. It's just like how people eat different kinds of foods and drive different kinds of cars and think different kinds of things, from politics to how they want their children to be raised to whatever. Like, it's just we are like a what's I saw a meme saying that's basically like this brain operating a suit of meat, and that are fed by our various influences from early childhood religion to where we've grown up, to the people around us, to the freedoms provided in our countries, and we're fed by those things, and then we are creative people who create a base going further. So I don't really think that there's like I mean, everyone just has a different process, and the people that make it are the ones who figured out a process that works for them.
I think maybe she was asking for examples, if you know any. That's my take on the question.
Yeah, and also maybe from each of your point of view as to how you formed up, I suppose, from the clay of your own lives, in terms of writing and in terms of in terms of the be as macro as you like. No, but how did you? I guess let's relate it to the topic itself. How did you know that the hybrid model? We all seem to be here in the hybrid model.
Oh, okay.
What was the moment when you knew that was that was the way you wanted to go? So Harmon, do you want to swoop in there and then we'll kind of curve?
Yeah. I think I knew from the start, and then I tried to change myself, as we often do. We know from like. We can know a lot of times from an early age, like what we're good at, what we're into. Like I remember when I was like 7 or 8, reading like Mark Twain or something, and I came home and I wrote like 30 pages of like my own version of it, and then I probably just threw it away. And then I started reading comic books, and I just wanted to create something like Spawn. So and I like drew my shitty pictures, and then I got in trouble because like I made the women with like too big of breasts and stuff. My mom like found it and it's like, what the hell is this? And I'm like, well, I'm trying to draw a comic book. So I think from an early age, I just wanted to be creative in that way. I didn't like the creativity aspect of music because it required having to work a bunch with other people. And so it's like, well, the drummer has a problem with his girlfriend, so he can't come to practice. The bass player smokes too much weed, and so he keeps forgetting his part. Like, you have to work with all these other people to create something. And so that's also one of the beauties of bands that do well, because it's like, wow, they really figured out how to do it. It's also why they break up eventually. But I fell back into writing, and I then tried to force myself into plotting more, like really think about it. Because, some authors, and even in the genre, like some authors are very adamant. It's like, you must have a system first, or you must have a plot first. And every time I tried to do what they said, I would be a copy. I feel like I'm a copy of what they're doing rather than just doing, my original best, and or the projects that I'm more proud of. And so I found a happy medium now.
Kev, when was the decisive moment for you?
I don't know. I possibly don't put as much thought into it as a lot of. Well, I definitely don't put as much thought into it as a lot of other people. I just, ultimately, I just really enjoy writing and telling stories and making shit up. And this is just how I do it. It's like, I have, like Harmon said, I've tried to be like, oh, such and such is like doing that. Maybe I'll try that. And I get like so far, and I feel like I've just like decided to run down a wind tunnel because it's just not not how I do it. So really, when I'm refining my process now, I'm just kind of trying to look at what I do and how I do it best. And that's it, because I think there's probably be a lot of people like me, but all of the advice you get is always tailored to like sort of specific ways. And I think a lot of aspiring authors will be put off from writing because they believe like they've got to meet all these specific criteria to just tell a story.
Yeah, one's own self-discovery is the only like tried and tested means of doing it. Like following the formula will just ultimately break down, as was said earlier. Justin, do you have that formative moment?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about it when Harmon was talking when he was a kid, and he would see something like, Mark Twain or Spawn and go home and write like 30 pages and just get right into it. And that was what I did as a kid. And I don't remember when exactly, but it was like when I was kind of trying to take writing more seriously when I was in college or shortly thereafter. And I was listening to Jim Butcher, who writes the Dresden Files and Codex Alera. And he was saying that when he was in college and taking a writing class, his professor told him like, okay, when you're writing, you need to like plot everything out, and you need to make a plan, and you need to stick to it. And he said, oh, that's, BS. I don't need to do that. I'll just do what I want. And then he never finished anything. And then one day he took his professor's advice, and he spent like 2 weeks plotting out the Dresden Files, or at least the first several books. And then he wrote it and he finished it. And so I thought, okay, that's how you got to do it. Like, because I really like Dresden Files, I really like Codex Alera, and I kind of had initially that same reaction that Jim Butcher did, like, oh, plotting the whole thing out is just like, no, that doesn't work for me. And I figured, oh, it's because it's difficult and nothing worth doing is ever easy. But the more I tried to plot, the worse it felt. Like, I would write, and then I would get to a point in the story where I would think like, oh, okay, this thing I just came up with, this idea I had while writing, feels more natural, more entertaining, more engaging than the plot structure I have pre-planned. But they're going in different directions. So I can't do this thing that feels better because it's breaking the plot. And so I would just force myself back into the plot, and then I would never finish anything. I wasn't writing 30 pages anymore like I was when I was younger, because it was just like, it was just work. And I mean, writing is work, but it's fun work. But when I was having to like make myself stick to this formula, that wasn't working for me. And that's not me trashing on planning. That's just me figuring out, this works for Jim Butcher. That's great for him. And he's obviously been a tremendous success with that. This doesn't work for me. And once I kind of realized that and stopped trying to force myself, round peg and square hole, then I started like not looking to fit myself into another technique, but to refine the technique that worked for me, which was kind of a bit of both, like a lot of people. So yeah, that was it.
That's fascinating to hear, Justin. Honestly, Eric.
So before I get into my own answer, I will say that anyone who is looking for sort of advice on pantsing, you can look at Stephen King's book on writing, because he is a 100% pantser. He does not do any plotting at all, which might explain why his endings are notoriously Stephen King-like.
You don't like those endings? That's
I
interesting.
think a lot of them are very weak. He has very, very strong beginnings and beautiful worlds and interesting characters, and then the endings just kind of come out of nowhere and just fall apart.
That's interesting. That's interesting. But yes, please, your answer.
So for me, I remember, I started wanting to write screenplays, and there was a book called How to Write a Screenplay in 21 Days. And part of it was taking out 120 pages and like writing on like page 10 what was going to happen, and then writing on like page 30, exactly where you're supposed to be hitting these beats. And I tried that, and it just didn't work for me. And I think part of why pantsing works, at least for me, is the trust in myself to problem solve after the fact. So writing yourself into a corner and understanding how you're going to need to pull it out, that you're going to have to occasionally stop, rethink things, sometimes backtrack a bit, and having the confidence that you can do that. And realizing that one day when I realized I had written myself into a complete corner and I had to stop and figure out how to do that, and that I managed to do that and make it seem like the story was meant to be that way. That it, at least for me, I felt like the book was so much better because it had that path that I couldn't figure out as the author while I was going along, which meant that most likely the readers weren't going to be guessing that either, and that it was still to the reader a satisfying conclusion.
I've identified two questions that I think are pretty much asking the same thing. So I'll crank them out in quick order and we can address them. From JD Glasscock, do you ever find when rolling out from the hip after a hot sec and several pages, you're like, that shit ain't going to work, and have to backtrack and start over? And similarly, Harmon already shaking his head. I think we can predict his. But Rachel Nee Kirk, hey Rachel, says, what happens when you're pantsing and you get lost in the weeds? Asking for a friend. The friend is Rachel. So yes, could we get maybe let's jump in with Justin.
I have more of a problem getting started. Like the question was like, do you ever write a few pages and then you realize like, oh, that shit was awful, like forget it. I have a problem like that's all up front. So I have to get around the thinking process of just do it. And if it's shit, it's shit. And no one's going to read it but you at first. Hopefully other people will read it later. But yeah, like basically I just give myself permission to be a total screw up for the first draft. And if it's just complete dog water, then so be it. I'll give it to my wife and some beta readers, and they'll laugh at me and point, and I'll feel bad, and I'll have a few drinks and cry, and then I'll go and fix it. As for getting lost in the weeds, same thing. Like if I go off on a tangent, if I realize it's a tangent, I'll just drop it, and I'll say, okay, maybe that'll go somewhere later, but I know it's not going anywhere now. So if I'm, halfway through chapter 5 and I'm like, this maybe need to revisit, then I'll skip ahead to the next part where I know is not irrelevant, and I'll start writing from there. And then maybe I'll realize like, oh, here's something, this would be a better place for that tangent I was writing earlier. So like that was one of those things I had to kind of unlearn. Like you have to write your draft in order, and you can't start chapter 4 until you finish chapter 3. And that's baloney. That's not a rule. You can skip around. You can start with the ending. You can start in the middle. You can jump around through the whole draft. There's no rules like that. You can do what you want. So yeah.
It speaks to what you were saying earlier about the tourist traps along the side of the road. That's very interesting. Eric, could we get your thoughts?
So I would actually say that those are two separate kind of questions. So
Okay.
one is, like if you're gonna if you make a mistake, like what do you do, or you feel like you've made a mistake. I'm different than Justin in that I can't sort of jump around. I need to sort of fix things as I go, or at least make a note of what the fix will be. Very often, I will just leave a note in the manuscript that, change this to this. And like sometimes later in the manuscript, I'll put, hey, remember when you did this, actually change this to that, give a skill to this character at this point when you gave him the wrong skill, change that so that it's this going forward. But I won't go back and fix it then just because, that'll take too much time. But also like trying to figure out how to do something in the future without necessarily cementing what has been done in the past, at least as a pantser, doesn't necessarily jive in my brain because I need to know everything that has happened in order to continue going in the future. And then second, if you get lost and you get in the weeds, I think that's a different thing entirely, because that means you haven't necessarily taken the wrong path. You just don't necessarily see the way forward. And something there is just, sometimes you just need to write your way out of it, in which case you just need to start introducing random chance or random variables, roll the die and make a decision based on that, flip a coin, or find a random event table. If you're writing fantasy, there's a ton of them for DMs, and roll on that and just have a random event happen and see what happens. It could be something as simple as that, just something as simple as having your character get caught by another, or catch a pickpocket if they're in the city. Someone tries to rob them. How does that change what's going on? And see if that gives you enough of a hook to get back to where you were in the beginning.
Absolutely. Jay Baraz, by the way, in the comments, I hope this is answering partially your particularly long question about kind of getting sidetracked as well. So we've heard from Justin, we've heard from Eric. Thank you so much. Let's hear from Kev on this one.
A bit sort of between Eric and Justin there, in that I let myself off with a lot in that first draft. And I sort of, if I followed Justin right, I wouldn't necessarily jump ahead. I might go down a path. So, for instance, I've just wrote a section in the book I'm writing now, Creations Being 5, where they go to a different location and a few people go with the main character. And I'm writing it, and I sort of want to explore the world in one way, but I'm having to carry the people along as well. So I basically just forgot about the people even being there and just treat it as though Clive, the MC, was completely by himself. And then when I go back, I'm just not going to take them. That's like sometimes you might need 3 boats for a mission, and you've only took 2. It's like, it's a simple fix, but I would put a note in maybe and say, you need 3 boats, you idiot. So there's a lot of like that, and not all ideas are good ideas, but I often write myself into corners, but then I actually find it quite fun trying to find ways out. And it's often the characters that'll take us into the corner anyway, because I might come up to a fight and in my head I've sort of gone, so like, we'll win this fight and then we'll move on to the next stage. But then the character's not equipped to actually win the fight, and I can't lie to myself and say like, oh, you can just win now. So I'd really like sort of enjoy that process of working out, well, how are they going to get out of this situation? How are they going to outthink it? And it tends to pop up some like really good ideas rather than just the Deus Ex Machina and they just won, which I struggle with in stories a lot.
I get you. There's that sort of little aphoristic sort of utterance. Ideas can be good or bad, but all ideas are cheap. It's ultimately about execution. Harman, can you lend some insight into the questions that were asked?
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. First of all, about backtracking, don't backtrack. Like, this is why people don't finish books. I've finished good and bad books, but I finished like getting close to 80 something. And the reason I do that is because I've practiced this philosophy of doing without attachment. And if exactly what Eric said, if something comes up like, and exactly what Kev said, if something comes up like 2 boats and then I had 3 boats, but there only needs to be 2, or like I've had a whole magic system change in the middle of the book as I'm writing it and exploring it deeper. I decided I want this character to be female, there's not time to go back and fix it then. You fix it on your first edit. And then my normal process is I edit it twice, and then towards the end, I then proofread everything again. So it's like a final polish before it goes to my editor and then proofers and whatever. And so, but I don't do more than those 3 times generally, because like I read this quote from the author of Cloud9. I'm blanking on his name. David Mitchell's his name, and he's a British author, and I really like his style. But he talked about like when to know to stop editing something, and it's when you've turned it back into its original form, right? And I found, for at least for me, for my own process, is like the 3 times, like if I keep pushing it further, I'll start just keep coming back to that original thing, right? Backtracking is why like some people just never finish books. Because like rather than just get it down, get it on paper, and then fix it, they keep going back and fixing things. And so they're constantly reworking chapter 1, chapter 2, or whatever it is. There's a caveat with this. This is unless you are Matt Dinniman, because Matt Dinniman, the way he writes is very much, he'll write a scene over and over and over again. So when he's doing it over and over and over again, he's writing the same scene. He's just augmenting it, making it better. But most of us aren't Matt Dinniman. So if you're trying to start off or get into it or really like put forth fiction, get it done. Even if it sucks in the end, even if it sucks after all your edits, you're learning along the way, you're getting better. As for getting in the weeds, I don't really even think about this. I don't really get in the weeds. If I get to a point where like I don't know what to do next, I switch projects, because I work on 2 projects at once. Usually one is almost finished and the other one is just starting. So the one that's almost finished, I'm editing. The one that's just starting, I'm just kind of like re-getting it back into it, right? One of the techniques I've learned that helps with this is when I'm doing my final proofing edit, I actually write an outline of the book, because when I'm switching projects, I later come back to book 2 or 3 of this project, and it could be 6 months later. So I read that first and I write a synopsis before I get back into the book. So if you're wondering what you've done, sometimes that can happen. That's one way to mitigate that. But I don't really get in the weeds, because I'll switch projects. And by that time, the next day when I'm back to it, I've had time to overnight think about it. Maybe I'll listen to some music or play some video games or whatever, or just kind of zone out thinking about it. So that's the way to fix that. If you get off on, if you're talking about weeds in terms of tangents, like the characters are rambling or something like that, you can fix that again when you do your edit, but don't backtrack and change it, because you're just going to get, you're going to delay the processing of your manuscript.
Fabulous. That media vampirism at work again, Harman. I see we got
It's Halloween.
we got a question in from Lars from Switzerland, I believe. How different is the first draft?
Denmark. Don't. He'll get mad, man. Denmark.
Oh no, Lars is in the D&D group. I know exactly what I'm doing.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, yeah. Just tell him how much better Norway is, and he'll.
Lars, thank you so much for your question. I really appreciate it. How different is the first draft for for all of you from the final version of your book? We can start this one let's start with Kev.
As I mentioned earlier, the first draft really is just a spine, a skeleton, if you like. So massively different. Little bit like Harman, I tend to do 3 drafts. So I'll do the first very rough, the second where I'm just really working on adding everything to the story, like fleshing it out, the description and everything. If I'm going the Royal Road route, I'd then put that second draft on Royal Road and take whatever feedback came there, if I go that route, which I don't always. And then I give it a sort of, if I've made any changes or I've thought of anything, I'll give it that final proofread with whatever notes I've made, then off to the editor, and I never look at it or read it again.
Rock and roll. Send it out into space. Hope it encounters Martians. Justin?
Not too different. Like I said, I hop around and make changes as needed as I'm going through the first one. I'd maybe say there's like a 10 to 15% difference between first draft and final draft, not counting typos or whatever. Those are too small. But yeah, mostly it's once I get done with the first draft, it's just cleaning up a few, if there's any logical inconsistencies, spotting those, and then just making sure it all fits together. But yeah, they're pretty close.
I'm just raging at Rachel at that comment. Just outrageous. Eric, can we possibly get your insight here?
Very little difference. I write sometimes right up until the deadline, and am uploading kind of not quite the first draft, but very close. So I tend to, unfortunately, I've grown to the point where I write pretty clean, and it doesn't require a ton of editing. Usually, it is literally just fixing whatever notes I've put in.
Okay. And Harmon, do you align mostly with that, or are you totally different?
I would be ashamed for people to see my first draft. There's two reasons why. One of the reasons is, and I started off, obviously like everyone else, typing on a laptop. I transitioned to speech to text because I started to have carpal tunnel issues, but then I went full time and I didn't have to have a day job and writing at the same time, because my day job I was on the computer a lot too. So I've kind of transitioned back, and I've found that speech to text is really good for editing. Like after I've already written it, because I can edit something more quickly, because I could just say exactly what I wanted to say instead. But I'm transitioning away from writing in that way because it has too many errors, right? And so if that first draft of something that's been speech to text, it looks like garbage. And also because the speech to text programs still aren't that great. I used a lot of placeholder names. So someone's name might be Sarnai and I use the name Sarah. So none of the character names even would match up with the final book. That transitioned now into my normal writing, by hand or whatever, I guess would be normal. I will change character names. I will change the magic system. I will change everything up until my proofing edit. And so I'll use placeholder things a lot with notes to remind myself to fix those types of things. But it's not recommended for someone just starting out, because I just do this all the time. Like I just every single day. It's what I love to do it. Like I don't know what else I would do if I didn't do it. I'd be really bored. And so I'm pretty in tune with it. And that kind of brings me back to something that Eric said that I wanted to touch on earlier about trust in self. That when you get to that point of being a writer, when you have trust in yourself, it's kind of a scary point, because at first, of course, we're often self-deprecating, so we don't believe that we trust ourselves. So it's like, I trust I know what I'm doing, but then you're also like, do I know what I'm doing? But then you like, well, I've sold like thousands of, at least I know I'm doing something, right? And so that trust in self is why I'm able to do that. I wouldn't recommend someone just doing their first manuscript, just going all out and just in terms of like, I'll fix everything on the end, because it might be too much for you to keep track of and you might miss things. But usually I always know those things because I'm just, I'm grinding it every day.
Fabulous. I think we have time for one more little. I saw a sweet little question, and then we can get into the wrap up. But sweet little question is from Josh McGriff. How well do you handle multiple good ideas coming to you several chapters before you can use it? I thought that was a nice little question to end on. Harmon, was that a sigh of beleaguerment?
Yeah.
Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll make it fast. So I just note them down and move on, because I don't know about you guys, but I have too many ideas. And so like if I start exploring them all, then I won't be doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I'll just note them like you would note like your grocery list. Like, and sometimes my right hand, I'm left-handed, my handwriting is really bad. So I started doing it on computer, because then I wouldn't be able to read my own notes. And then that sucks, because I'm like, damn, I don't know what I had a badass idea and I can't remember it because I didn't want to think about it. And now I can't read my own handwriting. So, maybe do it on a computer if you have bad handwriting.
Harmon,
just note them.
In a different life, you're a general practitioner doctor, and your handwriting is perfect.
Thank you.
I carry around field notes with me everywhere I go. And
Cool.
So anytime I have an idea, throw it in there. And after I fill one up, I'll go through it and pull stuff out. And if it's something I'm working on, it goes into a different notebook. If it's just a random idea for a story, it goes into a big idea book. And if it's a media I want to consume, it goes into a third book.
I knew this would be a sweet question to end on. We're getting these lovely little nuggets of information here at the end. Justin?
Yeah, I kind of do what Harmon does. I used to make, if I thought I had a really good story, if it's a story idea, I used to have separate story files for each one, and then there were just too many. So I'm just like, okay, this is my one story folder, like random idea story document, where I've just separated it into different sections, and it's like, okay, some of these I'll come back to, some of them I'll be like, no, clearly I was on something when I wrote that down. That means nothing. If they're ideas for a particular existing story, then yeah, I'll just make like a note in the bottom or something like this scene later or whatever. I'll have a little mini document of scenes I want to write. They usually all make it in, but there might be one or two that don't, and then I'll just tuck that one away for another book or something somewhere.
Marvelous. Kev?
I'm incredibly disorganized, and while I have tried to write notes on occasion, I'll never see them again. They'll just get lost, or I'll have changed notebooks at some point and like not even realized, to the point where I don't even bother anymore. But the way I look at it is, I'm going to have a good idea when I need it at that point anyway. And if any of those good ideas I had were good enough, I'm sure they'll come back. So yeah, just don't sweat it too much. For me,
I got something to add to this that might help some people.
Please.
I used to do like little notebooks, and I still kind of do it sometimes. I have like one of those remarkable tabs. I got a different one called Supernote. In 2011, I started using Evernote, and then I forgot about it. And then about 3 years ago, I was like, I need a better way to organize my notes and the research and like projects or whatever. And I found my old Evernote account, which was full of all this shit that I'd saved up, everything from an emotional source that I'd like painstakingly copied from the internet, like in 2012, to like just all this crap. And so I've been using Evernote now, and I like that it's on my phone. It used to be on Kindle, but I think they removed it from the Kindle App Store, so I could actually like upload notes from books directly to it. But I can still email them to myself and upload it that way. But the Evernote app has really helped me with that, because then if I'm on we always have our phone with us. It's just really easy to compartmentalize that way. And so I will shortcut the projects I'm currently working on, and then just store everything else. And then also it's kind of cool to find a treasure from like 8 years ago or whatever, that I've, notes I've already taken, or some idea I already had. And so I do recommend using that to people that are trying to organize their notes, or they have too many ideas or something. It's helped me.
That's very charming, Harmon. Thank you. Okay, so we'll close this out then. So broad conclusions seem to be that hybridization model works really well. Each of our authors has a slightly different methodology for approaching that hybrid, but each sounded equally fabulous and fascinating to me. So yes, let's finish out. We'll go from person to person. Tell us one more time who you are, how we can find you, and what you're working on at the moment. Let's start with Eric.
You can find me on Amazon. Just search my name. I write The Good Guys and the Bad Guys. You can also find me at airquotespublishing.com.
Hell yes. Justin.
You can also find me on Amazon under my name, or at jjakerneck.com. And I write The Homicidal Aliens Are Invading, and All I Got Is This Stat Menu series.
The title is, I don't think it's too long at all. I think it's just right. This title is just right, Goldilocks. Harmon?
Hey, everybody. I'm Harmon Cooper. You can find me on harmoncooper.com or on the Amazon store. And I'm launching a web serial in December called Battledeck Academy. That's kind of Kill Bill meets Harry Potter, and I'm really stoked about that.
Glorious, as are we all. Kev, close us out.
Yes, you can find me on Amazon and kevinsinclair.co.uk. Yeah, you can find all my books in either of those places.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you to our excellent panelists. You were absolutely fantastic. And yeah, Geneva, you can close us out at any time. Thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank
Wonderful
you.
work.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one.
Cheers, Jack.
Bye-bye. Nice meeting everyone.
Queen wave,
Bye-bye.
Queen wave, Queen wave.
There you go.